Welcome back to the CBN News channel. Recent reporting from the online publication Politico reveals the Trump administration is considering zeroing out or essentially shutting down its refugee admissions program. Our Heather Sells spoke with Dr. Ed Stancer, the Billy Graham Chair of Church, Mission and Evangelism at Wheaton College, on how evangelicals feel about this issue.
There was a Pew Poll last year that made the rounds of social media again recently, and it said that only 1/4 of white evangelicals say the U.S. has a responsibility to accept refugees. Do you think that has encouraged the Trump administration to consider shutting down the U.S. refugee program?
I think that would probably be part of it. I think as we're gearing up for the 2020 election, part of the themes that, of course, President Trump has been trumpeting is that there is a need to shut down illegal immigration, asylum seekers and refugees. I think that's part of the bigger plan. But yes, I think probably seeing that poll and other polls that indicate evangelicals are maybe the least welcoming to refugees and immigrants would certainly embolden a trial balloon like this.
Well, I think it's kind of confusing because there is that Pew Poll, but then you also have a lot of evangelical churches that welcome refugees. So from your standpoint, I'm curious as to where you see evangelicals landing on this issue.
Yeah, and it's a strange contrast. I remember actually writing an article after speaking at the Refugee Highway Partnership about how whenever I go to a refugee ministry meeting, it's filled with evangelicals who are caring for those that are hurting as refugees. And then I'll often read news stories that say evangelicals are the most anti-refugee. Part of it may be that the U.S. has a responsibility. That word could have maybe caused people to think, well, it's not a responsibility. But I do think it is ultimately something that a nation that is as caring as the United States, that cares for justice and cares for the rule of law, that cares for people who are following processes. Here's a refugee that goes through an almost 2-year process. This is not, you can argue and debate about illegal immigration and all this sort of stuff. This is not that. So maybe it's education that we need more of. I hope the U.S. will return to its historic levels, which has been under Republican and Democratic administrations, a little under 100,000 refugees a year. This is a drop in the bucket, but it's part of our responsibility of being a kind of a world leader in so many ways. And one of those ways is to say, when there's people in crisis, we're here to be a part of that with such a strongly vetted program like the refugee program.
Do you think there's any case that an evangelical could make to say, hey, the U.S. should not accept refugees? Or do you think that part and parcel of being an evangelical, believing what the Bible says, includes welcoming those who are being persecuted to our country?
Well, I think there's always a sense that it does individually. If someone's hurting individually, I'm going to go to them. I think the Bible doesn't give us a specific number, for example, of how many refugees a country should let in. Ronald Reagan spoke of America as a city set upon a hill, reminding us of some biblical imagery as well. And I think as a city set upon a hill, we want to be those who are a light to the nations, who welcome and care for other people. What that number is, I don't, I can go to Second Opinions, chapter 4, verse 11, and say that's 4,000. I hope it's not zero. I'd like to see it back to where its historic norms have been, just below 100,000, because we have ministries across the country. And, the churches that I've been involved in and serving, every one of them has been involved in refugee resettlement. This is an area where evangelical Christians have really led, and yet the polls say maybe there's kind of a mixed message that's there.
So do you think a shift is going on then within the evangelical world on this issue? Do you think people are maybe retreating from what has previously been a real welcoming of refugees?
Well, I think that's true around the world. We see a rising nationalism in Quebec, in the UK, and more countries around the whole world, a rising nationalism and an anti-immigrant, anti-refugee mentality that's growing. I think that as followers of Jesus, we would want to be among those who say, can we do this safely? And the answer with the refugee program is clearly and historically yes. Can we do this compassionately? And I think the answer is yes. So I want to be one who advocates to the government that, this is, and to the president. The president actually sets this number since 1980, the Refugee Act of 1980. Republicans and Democrats alike, I hope and I appeal to President Trump to make sure that the world knows that we're a compassionate nation, and he's very concerned about our safety. He runs the refugee resettlement program. He's very concerned about our safety, and I think we have a safe program with a track record of safety. Let's continue it. Let's not shut it down.
Are you hearing much feedback from the pastors and the ministry leaders that you're interacting with about this proposed or possible shutdown?
Actually, yes, and I've received several emails about this. People are, speaking up and speaking out about how they can be a part of it. World Relief, which is part of the National Association of Evangelicals, has been such a key partner. I'm actually in DuPage County, which is one of the leading places where that refugee resettlement ministry takes place. So this, to a lot of us, is kind of surprising. I think for many evangelicals have been. I mean, we know the numbers, right? White evangelicals voted for President Trump at an unprecedentedly high number. But a lot of people are saying, well, maybe this is not the best course of action. And we've seen this before. We saw this with family separation, where evangelical leaders, many of whom were supportive of President Trump, also spoke up and said, this is not the kind of nation we want to be. I would say, again, zeroing out the refugee program is not the kind of nation we want to be.
All right, Ed Stetzer, Wheaton College, thank you so much for your time.